I was getting into the Uber when my roommate texted me. "That's not the driver from the app. Different car, different face. Do not get in." My hand was on the door handle of the silver Camry when my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I was already halfway into the back seat, my weekend bag sliding across the leather upholstery. The driver smiled at me through the rearview mirror. A woman maybe in her 40s with dark hair pulled into a neat bun. She'd said my name when I approached the car, confirmed my destination to the airport. Everything seemed normal, but Jenna's text stopped me cold. I pulled my phone out and read it again, my body frozen in an awkward half-crouch between standing on the curb and sitting in the car. The driver's smile faltered slightly when I didn't move. She asked if everything was okay, her voice pleasant and professional. I looked at my phone screen showing the Uber app. The car was supposed to be a black SUV. The driver's photo showed a man named Carlos with a beard and glasses. This was a silver sedan. This was a woman who looked nothing like Carlos. My brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe the app glitched. Maybe Carlos sent his wife to cover his shift. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But Jenna's message was clear and urgent. Different car, different face. Do not get in. I pulled myself back out of the vehicle and stepped onto the sidewalk, my bag still inside. The driver's expression changed immediately. The pleasant smile vanished, replaced by something harder and more calculating. She asked again if there was a problem, but her tone had shifted. Less concerned, more annoyed. I told her I needed to check something on my app. She said the meter was running and she didn't have time to wait around. I reached back into the car and grabbed my bag, pulling it toward me. The driver's hand shot out and grabbed the other end. She told me I was being rude, wasting her time, and I needed to make up my mind. Her grip on my bag was tight, too tight. I yanked harder and the bag came free. I stumbled backward onto the curb as she threw the car into gear and drove away fast, tires squealing slightly on the pavement. My heart was pounding as I watched the silver Camry disappear around the corner. I looked down at my phone and opened a text conversation with Jenna. "Where are you?" I typed. "How did you know that wasn't my driver?" 3 dots appeared immediately. Then her response came through. "I'm tracking your Uber through the app sharing feature you set up last month. I saw you getting into the wrong car from the live map. Your actual driver Carlos is still 3 blocks away in a black SUV. He's been stuck at a red light. That car you almost got into wasn't affiliated with any ride service at all." I could see Jenna was calling me now. I answered, and her voice came through panicked and breathless. Jenna was talking fast, words tumbling over each other. She said she'd been watching my location because I'd asked her to track my ride to make sure I got to the airport safely after that news story last week about the woman who was assaulted by a fake Uber driver. She saw the blue dot representing me start moving toward a vehicle marker that wasn't my assigned driver. She'd screenshot the actual driver's information and compared it to what she could see through my location. Nothing matched. She'd tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail, so she texted instead. I told her I'd gotten her message just in time. If I'd been 1 second slower, if I'd already closed the door and the car had started moving, I might not have seen the text until it was too late. A black SUV pulled up to the curb, and the driver rolled down his window. He called out my name and asked if I was heading to the airport. He apologized for being late, said there was an accident backing up traffic. I checked the app carefully this time. License plate matched. Car matched. Driver's face matched the photo. Carlos with the beard and glasses, exactly as shown. I opened the back door cautiously and got in, telling him yes, I was ready to go. As we pulled away from the curb, I told him what had just happened. A fake driver in the wrong car had tried to pick me up. Carlos's face went serious in the rearview mirror. He said this was the 3rd time he'd heard about something like this happening in our area this month. Someone was targeting rideshare passengers. Carlos told me about another passenger he'd picked up 2 weeks ago who said a fake driver had tried to convince her to get in his car instead of waiting for her actual ride. The woman had been suspicious because the driver seemed too insistent, too aggressive about getting her into the vehicle. She'd refused and he'd driven off angry. Carlos said his passenger had reported it to the police, but he didn't know if anything came of it. He asked if I was going to file a report. I told him I would as soon as I got to the airport. He said I should also report it to Uber directly because they needed to know people were impersonating their drivers. This was a safety issue that could get someone seriously hurt or worse. I thanked him for the advice and sat back trying to process what had almost happened to me. The rest of the ride to the airport passed in tense silence. I kept replaying those moments in my mind. The woman's smile that had seemed genuine at first. The way she'd confirmed my name and destination like she knew exactly who she was supposed to pick up. How had she known those details? The only way she could have that information was if she'd been watching the pickup location, watching for someone who looked like they were waiting for a ride. Or maybe she had access to ride-sharing data somehow, though that seemed impossibly sophisticated for a random criminal. My mind spun with possibilities, none of them good. Carlos dropped me at departures and I tipped him extra, thanking him again for being a legitimate driver who actually matched his app profile. Inside the terminal, I found an airport police officer and told him what happened. He took notes but seemed less concerned than I expected. He said fake rideshare drivers were becoming a common scam. Usually they were just trying to charge people inflated rates for rides, not necessarily planning anything violent. But he agreed I should report it to both Uber and the local police department with jurisdiction over where the pickup occurred. He gave me a card with a case number and sent me on my way. His casual dismissal of the incident bothered me. This wasn't just someone trying to overcharge for a ride. The woman had grabbed my bag when I tried to leave. She'd been aggressive and angry when I pulled away. That wasn't normal scammer behavior. That was something worse. I made it through security and found my gate with an hour to spare. I called the non-emergency police line and filed a report, giving them every detail I could remember. The silver Camry, though I hadn't caught the license plate. The woman's appearance, dark hair in a bun, around 40 years old. White, medium build. The location of the pickup, the time, everything. The dispatcher said someone would follow up if they needed more information, but she didn't sound particularly invested in the case. I hung up feeling frustrated by the lack of urgency. Then I opened the Uber app and filed a safety report through their system, explaining what happened and emphasizing that someone was using their platform to target passengers. Their automated response thanked me for reporting and said they took safety seriously. My flight was routine, 3 hours to Denver for a work conference. I tried to focus on my presentation notes, but my mind kept drifting back to that moment on the curb. What would have happened if Jenna hadn't been watching? If I'd gotten all the way into that car and closed the door? Where would that woman have taken me? I thought about the other incidents Carlos mentioned. 3 times in 1 month meant this was a pattern, an organized effort. Someone was deliberately targeting rideshare passengers. The question was why. Robbery seemed too simple an explanation. There were easier ways to rob people than impersonating Uber drivers. Human trafficking crossed my mind and I felt sick. Women disappearing into vehicles they thought were safe rides. It happened. It happened more than people wanted to admit. The conference took up the next 3 days. I stayed focused during panels and networking events, but every time I requested a ride through the app, I felt anxiety spike through my chest. I checked and rechecked every detail. License plate, car model, driver photo. I called Jenna each time and stayed on the phone with her until I was safely inside the correct vehicle. She didn't complain about my paranoia. She understood. On the final day of the conference, I was having drinks with colleagues when my phone rang. Unknown number with my home area code. I almost didn't answer, but something made me step away from the table and take the call. A detective named Vivian Ortega from the police department introduced herself and asked if I had time to talk about the incident I'd reported 4 days ago. Detective Ortega said my report had been flagged because it matched a pattern they were investigating. She needed to ask me detailed questions about everything I remembered. I found a quiet corner of the hotel bar and went through it all again. Every detail, every moment. The detective listened without interrupting, and I could hear her typing notes. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she told me something that made my blood run cold. A woman had disappeared 6 days ago after requesting an Uber from a shopping center. Her phone's last known location was near that pickup spot. Security footage showed her getting into a silver sedan that wasn't her assigned driver. The woman hadn't been seen since. Her name was Valerie Ramos. She was 28 years old. She had a 6-year-old daughter. I sat down hard on a leather armchair in the corner, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. Detective Ortega continued. They'd been investigating Valerie's disappearance as a potential kidnapping, and when my report came through mentioning a silver Camry and a woman driver pretending to be an Uber, it connected to their case. She asked if I could come to the station when I returned home to look at photos, see if I could identify the driver from my attempted pickup. I told her I was flying back tomorrow morning and could come straight from the airport. She said that would be helpful. Then she asked me something that made my hands start shaking. She asked if I remembered anything unusual about the driver's behavior beyond trying to keep me in the car. Any phrases she used, any accent, any distinctive features. I closed my eyes and forced myself back into that moment. The driver's smile when I first approached. Pleasant, professional. The shift in her expression when I hesitated. The hardness that replaced the friendliness. Her hand grabbing my bag. Her voice telling me the meter was running, that I was wasting her time. Then I remembered something else. When she'd first confirmed my name, she'd pronounced it slightly wrong. My name is Simone, pronounced like the name Simon with an extra syllable at the end. Most people get it right. But this driver had said it like Simone, with emphasis on the first syllable. It was a small thing, but it stuck in my memory because it was jarring. I told Detective Ortega about this detail. She made a note and said every observation helped, no matter how small. After the call ended, I went back to my colleagues and made excuses about needing to return to my room. Back in the hotel, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Valerie Ramos, 28 years old with a 6-year-old daughter. She'd gotten into a car thinking she was safe, thinking she'd requested a legitimate ride through a trusted app, and now she was missing. I grabbed my laptop and started searching for news articles about her disappearance. There wasn't much coverage. A short piece in the local news section of our city's paper. Missing woman, last seen at Riverside Shopping Plaza. Anyone with information, please contact police. The photo showed a young woman with long dark hair and a bright smile. She looked happy. She looked like someone with a full life ahead of her. I found Valerie's social media accounts. The last post was from the morning of her disappearance. A photo of her daughter starting first grade. Backpack nearly as big as she was, holding a sign that said, "First day of school." The comments were full of friends and family saying how cute she looked, how fast kids grow up, Then the comments shifted. People asking if anyone had heard from Valerie, expressing worry, then fear, then grief. Her most recent posts were filled with messages begging her to come home, saying people were praying for her safe return. Her mother had posted on her own page asking for any information about her daughter's whereabouts. The pain in those words was visceral. I closed my laptop feeling like I might be sick. The next morning, I flew home in a daze. Jenna picked me up from the airport and I told her everything. About Detective Ortega's call, about Valerie Ramos, about how I could have been taken the same way if Jenna hadn't been watching my location. Jenna's face went pale. She gripped the steering wheel tight enough that her knuckles turned white. She said we were going straight to the police station. She wasn't letting me go alone. I was grateful. The thought of walking into that building by myself, looking at photos of potential kidnappers, knowing that a woman was missing because she'd fallen for the same trap I'd almost walked into, it was too much to carry alone. Jenna drove us directly to the station and parked in the visitor lot. Detective Ortega met us in the lobby. She was in her early 50s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing a blazer and slacks. Her handshake was firm and her eyes were kind but tired. She led us to a conference room with a table covered in folders and printouts. She thanked me for coming in so quickly. She explained they were pursuing multiple leads in Valerie's disappearance, but the fake Uber angle was their strongest theory. If someone was systematically targeting rideshare passengers, they needed to identify and stop them before anyone else got hurt. She pulled out a tablet and opened a folder of photographs, dozens of faces staring back at me. She asked me to look carefully and let her know if I recognized the woman who'd tried to pick me up. I scrolled through the images slowly. Women of various ages and ethnicities, some with mugshots looking directly at the camera, others pulled from driver's licenses or social media. None of them looked familiar at first. Then I reached a photo near the end of the collection and stopped. The woman had dark hair, though in this photo it was worn down past her shoulders instead of in a bun. She was smiling at the camera, but there was something hard in her eyes, something calculating. I told Detective Ortega this might be her. I wasn't completely certain because the hairstyle was different and I'd only seen her for maybe 90 seconds total. But the bone structure of her face, the set of her jaw, the way her mouth curved when she smiled, it all matched my memory. The detective made a note and asked me to rate my confidence on a scale of 1 to 10. I said maybe a 7 or 8. The detective nodded and wrote something down. Then she told me who the woman in the photo was. Her name was Corinne Wallace. She was 39 years old with a criminal record including fraud, identity theft, and assault. She'd been arrested 3 times in the past decade but had never served significant jail time. Most recently, she'd been investigated for running an online scam targeting elderly victims, but the case had fallen apart due to lack of evidence. Detective Ortega said they'd been looking at Corinne as a person of interest in several missing persons cases over the past 2 years, women who'd disappeared under suspicious circumstances, but they'd never had enough evidence to charge her with anything. Until now. My attempted pickup combined with the security footage of Valerie getting into a silver sedan driven by someone matching Corinne's description might be enough to get a warrant. I asked what they thought Corinne was doing with the women she took. Detective Ortega's expression darkened. She said they had theories but no confirmed evidence. Human trafficking was the most likely explanation. Corinne wasn't working alone. That much they knew. They'd tracked her movements and identified at least 2 other individuals who might be part of her operation. A man named Trevor Kane who owned several properties in neighboring counties, properties with no utility records, no signs of occupation, but owned under shell companies that traced back to him, and a woman named Beth Hooper, who had connections to underground networks moving people across state lines. Detective Ortega said if they could find Valerie alive, she might be at one of Trevor's properties, but they needed probable cause to search those locations. They needed a warrant, and warrants required evidence. Jenna spoke up for the first time since we'd entered the conference room. She asked if my identification of Corinne from the photo was enough evidence for a warrant. Detective Ortega shook her head. A tentative ID from a brief encounter wasn't sufficient on its own. They needed something more concrete. She asked if I'd be willing to help them get that evidence. I asked what she meant. The detective explained they were planning a sting operation. They wanted to set up a fake rideshare pickup with me as the target. If Corinne took the bait and attempted to pick me up again, they'd have her on camera attempting to kidnap someone. That combined with my testimony and the security footage from Valerie's abduction would be enough to arrest her and search Trevor's properties. I felt my stomach drop. She was asking me to make myself bait. Jenna immediately said no. Absolutely not. There was no way I was putting myself in danger like that. Detective Ortega raised her hands in a calming gesture. She explained I would never be in actual danger. They'd have plainclothes officers surrounding the pickup location. The moment Corinne's vehicle arrived, they'd move in. I wouldn't even get close to the car. They just needed her to show up, to demonstrate she was actively targeting passengers. I looked at the detective's tired eyes and thought about Valerie Ramos, about her 6-year-old daughter waiting for her mother to come home, about the possibility that Valerie was being held somewhere right now, scared and hurt, while we sat here debating strategy. I told Detective Ortega I would do it. Jenna grabbed my arm and said I was insane. I told her I had to. This woman had almost taken me. She had taken Valerie. How many others had there been that we didn't know about? The sting operation was set for the following evening. Detective Ortega explained the plan in detail. I would request an Uber from a predetermined location, a shopping plaza similar to where Valerie had disappeared. The police would monitor all rideshare activity in the area and watch for any attempts to intercept my pickup. If Corinne or anyone matching her description approached in an unregistered vehicle, they'd move in immediately. I would be wearing a wire so they could hear everything. I would have a panic button in my pocket. At no point would I be alone or unprotected. Jenna insisted on being part of the operation too. Detective Ortega initially refused, but Jenna argued that it would look more natural if I was with a friend, making it seem like a routine outing rather than a setup. The detective eventually agreed Jenna could be present but had to stay at a distance. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. I couldn't focus on work. I kept checking my phone every few minutes as if the clock would suddenly jump forward to evening. Jenna came over to my apartment after her shift, and we sat together on the couch not saying much. She kept asking if I was sure about this. I kept saying yes, even though I wasn't sure at all. I was terrified, but I was also angry. Angry that women couldn't trust a simple ride from point A to point B. Angry that predators were exploiting technology designed to make our lives easier. Angry that Valerie was missing and her daughter was without her mother. That anger was stronger than my fear. At 6 p.m., we drove to the shopping plaza where the operation would take place. Detective Ortega was waiting in an unmarked van in the parking lot. She fitted me with a small microphone that clipped inside my jacket collar and a panic button disguised as a key fob. She went over the plan one more time. I would request a ride through the Uber app. My destination would be a restaurant about 3 miles away. My actual assigned driver would be an undercover officer who would stay several blocks away unless needed. If Corinne or anyone else attempted to pick me up in an unregistered vehicle, I was to stall for time, ask questions, say I needed to check something on my phone, do anything to keep the situation from progressing while backup closed in. If I felt I was in immediate danger, I was to press the panic button and drop to the ground. Officers would move in within seconds. I nodded understanding, even though my hands were shaking. Jenna walked with me to the designated pickup spot near the plaza's main entrance. She was supposed to stay about 20 feet away, far enough to not seem connected to me but close enough to witness what happened. I could see other people scattered around the parking lot, shoppers loading bags into cars, a man talking on his phone near the entrance, a woman pushing a shopping cart. I knew at least half of them were undercover officers. Detective Ortega had said they had 8 people positioned around the area. I wouldn't be able to tell who was law enforcement and who was civilian. That was intentional. They wanted everything to look completely normal. I opened the Uber app and requested a ride to the restaurant. The app showed a driver named David would arrive in 6 minutes. A gray sedan, license plate matching what was displayed. Now we waited. 3 minutes passed. 4. I checked the app compulsively. David was still 3 blocks away according to the map. Then I heard it. A car engine approaching from the wrong direction. I looked up and my heart stopped. A silver Camry was pulling up to the curb. The same car from 4 days ago. Or at least the same make and model. The driver's window rolled down and I saw her face. Corinne Wallace. She called out my name. Asked if I was heading to Giuseppe's restaurant. That was my destination. How did she know that? The only way she could know was if she had access to the Uber system somehow, or if she'd been monitoring ride requests in this area waiting for a target. She told me to get in, said traffic was bad, and we needed to leave now. I forced myself to stay calm. I told her I needed to check my app first. Corinne's friendly expression flickered. She said I didn't need to check anything. She was my driver. We were wasting time. I made a show of looking at my phone screen. I said the app showed my driver was in a gray sedan, not silver. Corinne's jaw tightened. She said the app must have glitched. She had multiple vehicles. She sometimes switched which one she used. It was a weak excuse and she knew it. Her hand moved to her gear shift like she was preparing to drive away. I took a step closer to keep her engaged, hoping the officers would move in. I asked for her name. She hesitated for just a second before saying her name was Diana. The lie was obvious. I could see her calculating whether to keep trying or cut her losses. Then everything happened at once. 2 unmarked cars came from different directions, blocking the silver Camry's exit routes. 4 officers in tactical gear emerged from positions around the parking lot, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Corinne's eyes went wide with shock and fury. She threw the car into reverse and tried to back out, but another vehicle blocked her from behind. She was boxed in completely. An officer yanked open her driver's side door and ordered her out of the vehicle with her hands visible. Corinne came out screaming that this was harassment, that she hadn't done anything wrong, that she was just trying to pick up a passenger. But her protest died when Detective Ortega approached and told her she was under arrest for attempted kidnapping, conspiracy, and multiple other charges they were still compiling. I watched from where I stood as they handcuffed Corinne and read her rights. She was still yelling about lawsuits and false arrest, but the officers ignored her. They searched the silver Camry and found things that made my blood run cold. Zip ties in the glove compartment, a roll of duct tape, a syringe and bottles of what looked like sedatives, a knife under the driver's seat. All items that suggested this wasn't about overcharging for rides or simple robbery. This was about taking people and keeping them subdued. Detective Ortega walked over to me and asked if I was okay. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure that was true. My whole body was shaking from adrenaline. Jenna appeared at my side and grabbed my hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Detective Ortega told me I'd done exactly what they needed. Corinne had attempted to pick me up in an unregistered vehicle while claiming to be my assigned driver. That was enough to charge her with attempted kidnapping. Combined with the evidence from Valerie's case and the items found in her vehicle, they had sufficient cause to search properties associated with Trevor Kane and Beth Hooper. She said they were executing those warrants tonight. Multiple teams were already mobilizing to hit 3 locations simultaneously. If Valerie was alive and being held at one of those properties, they'd find her. I asked if I could go with them. Detective Ortega shook her head. This was police business now. I'd done my part. Now I needed to go home and let them do theirs. She promised to call me as soon as they knew anything. Jenna drove me home, but neither of us could settle. We sat in my apartment with the TV on, but not really watching it, just waiting for the phone to ring, waiting to know if this nightmare operation had accomplished anything beyond catching one predator. Around midnight, my phone finally buzzed, Detective Ortega's name on the screen. I answered immediately. Her voice was tight with controlled emotion when she told me they'd found Valerie. She was alive. She was at a property owned by Trevor Kane in the next county, locked in a basement room with another woman they hadn't even known was missing. Both women were dehydrated and traumatized, but physically okay. They were being transported to the hospital. Valerie's family had been notified. Her daughter would see her mother again. I started crying before I realized I was doing it. Jenna took the phone from my hand and spoke to Detective Ortega while I sat there with tears streaming down my face. Relief so overwhelming I couldn't stand. Valerie was alive. The little girl in that first day of school photo wouldn't lose her mother. The operation had worked. My fear and anger had been channeled into something that saved lives. Jenna hung up and pulled me into a hug. She was crying too. We stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other and letting the weight of what had happened sink in. When we finally pulled apart, Jenna said I was either the bravest or stupidest person she'd ever met. Maybe both. I laughed, a sound that came out choked and wet. I told her I couldn't have done any of it without her watching my location that first day. The arrests made news the following morning. Major headlines about a human trafficking ring broken up by police. Corinne Wallace, Trevor Kane, and Beth Hooper, all in custody, facing multiple charges including kidnapping, conspiracy, human trafficking, and assault. The articles mentioned 2 women had been rescued. One was named as Valerie Ramos. The other's identity was being withheld at her request. I learned later she was a college student who'd disappeared 7 weeks ago after requesting a ride from campus. Her family had thought she'd run away. Turned out she'd been locked in the same basement as Valerie, both of them waiting to be transported out of state to buyers who'd paid for them like they were merchandise. The thought made me sick. That could have been me, if Jenna hadn't been watching, if I'd closed that car door, if I'd trusted too easily. Detective Ortega called me 2 days later and asked if I'd be willing to meet with Valerie. She said Valerie had requested to speak with me, to thank me in person. I agreed immediately. We met at the hospital where Valerie was still recovering. She was in a private room, her mother sitting beside the bed holding her hand. Valerie looked smaller than in her photos, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes and bruises on her wrists where she'd been restrained. But she smiled when I walked in, a real smile that reached her eyes. She thanked me for what I'd done, said Detective Ortega had explained everything, how I'd almost been taken, how I'd helped catch Corinne, how that led to finding her. She said her daughter had been staying with her mother for the past week, asking every day when Mommy was coming home. Now she had an answer. Valerie's mother hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. She said I'd given her daughter back to her, given her granddaughter, her mother. There were no words adequate to thank someone for that. I told her I'd just done what anyone would do. She shook her head. Not everyone would put themselves at risk like I had. Not everyone would volunteer to be bait to catch a predator. That took a special kind of courage or recklessness. Probably both. We talked for about an hour. Valerie told me bits and pieces of what had happened to her in that basement, how Corinne had injected her with something that made her unable to fight, how she'd woken up in a locked room with no windows, how Trevor would bring food once a day and refuse to answer questions, how the other woman, the college student, had told her they were being kept until arrangements were finalized to move them out of state, how terrified she'd been that she'd never see her daughter again. I left the hospital feeling heavy with the weight of what Valerie had endured, but also lighter knowing she was safe now, that her daughter would grow up with her mother, that the system had worked, even though it had required civilians to take risks that shouldn't have been necessary. Over the following weeks, I gave multiple statements to prosecutors building cases against all 3 defendants. I testified at preliminary hearings. I identified Corinne in lineups and from photo arrays. The evidence against all of them was overwhelming. The prosecution was confident about securing convictions. Valerie and the college student both testified as well, their accounts corroborating each other and painting a clear picture of an organized operation to kidnap and traffic women. The trial took place 8 months later. I sat in the courtroom for 3 days, listening to testimonies and evidence. The prosecution laid out how Corinne would monitor rideshare apps looking for solo female passengers requesting pickups from isolated areas. She'd intercept them in her silver Camry, using information she'd gathered about their destinations to seem legitimate. Once she had them in her vehicle, she'd inject them with sedatives and drive them to one of Trevor's properties. There they'd be held until Beth arranged buyers, other trafficking networks willing to pay for young women. The whole operation was sickeningly efficient. They'd been doing this for at least 2 years. Valerie and the college student were just the ones they'd managed to find. Detectives suspected there might be other victims they hadn't identified yet. Women who'd disappeared and were written off as runaways or lost to other circumstances. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on all counts for all 3 defendants. Corinne got 45 years. Trevor got 50. Beth got 35. All with no possibility of parole for at least 20 years. The judge's sentencing statement was scathing. She said they'd preyed on women's vulnerability, exploited technology meant to provide safety, and destroyed lives for profit. Their actions warranted the maximum penalties allowed by law. I watched Corinne's face as the sentence was read. She showed no emotion, no remorse, just the same calculating hardness I'd seen in her eyes that day at the curb. She'd seen me as nothing more than a commodity, a product to be acquired and sold. The thought still made me feel sick months later. After the trial ended, I tried to return to normal life, but normal felt different now. I was hyper-vigilant about safety in ways I'd never been before. I verified every rideshare driver obsessively. I sent my location to Jenna every single time I got in any vehicle with a stranger. I took self-defense classes. I carried pepper spray. Some people might say I was being paranoid, but I'd seen what happened when women trusted too easily, when they assumed safety where there was none. Valerie had done everything right. She'd used a legitimate app, waited in a public place, thought she was taking basic precautions, and she'd still been taken. If that could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. The only difference was I'd been lucky enough to have someone watching my back. Jenna and I stayed close, closer than we'd been before all this happened. Trauma bonded people in strange ways. She'd saved my life by paying attention when it mattered. I'd helped save Valerie and the other woman by being willing to take a risk. We'd both been changed by the experience, made harder in some ways, more cautious, less willing to give people the benefit of the doubt, but also more aware of how important it was to look out for each other, to not assume someone else would notice when things went wrong, to be the someone else when needed. She told me once that she'd almost not texted me that day. She'd seen me getting into the wrong car and thought maybe I knew something she didn't. Maybe I'd requested a different driver. Maybe the app was confused. She'd almost convinced herself it wasn't her business. Then she'd thought about how she'd feel if something happened to me and she'd stayed silent. So she'd sent that text. 1 year after the arrests, Valerie reached out and invited me to her daughter's 7th birthday party. I almost said no. I didn't want to intrude on their family celebration, but Valerie insisted. She said I was part of their family now whether I liked it or not. Her daughter knew my name, knew that Miss Simone had helped the police find Mommy when she was lost. I went to the party in a community center filled with balloons and children running around in organized chaos. Valerie's daughter was a tiny bundle of energy with dark curls and her mother's smile. She ran up to me and hugged my legs before I'd even taken off my coat. Valerie stood nearby with tears in her eyes. She mouthed, "Thank you." I mouthed back that no thanks were needed, but we both knew they were. We'd both been given second chances that not everyone got. Detective Ortega attended the party too. She'd become something like a friend over the past year, checking in periodically to see how I was doing. She told me the investigation into Corinne's network had uncovered 6 additional victims, women who'd been trafficked through their operation before the arrests. 2 had been found alive in other states, recovered through coordinated efforts with federal agencies. 4 were still missing. Their cases remained open. Ortega said she thought about those 4 women every day, wondered where they were, if they were alive, if they'd ever make it home. I asked how she dealt with that weight. She said you learned to carry it, or you broke under it. She'd chosen to carry it because somebody had to. That was the job. I understood that now in ways I hadn't before all this happened. The party ended with cake and presents, and Valerie's daughter blowing out 7 candles while making a wish I suspected had something to do with her mother never leaving again. I watched them together, mother and daughter, reunited against odds that had been stacked heavily against them. This was the good outcome, the happy ending that statistics said shouldn't have happened. Most kidnapping victims weren't found alive. Most trafficking rings operated for years before being discovered, if they were discovered at all. We'd gotten lucky. A combination of timing and technology and people paying attention at the right moment. I wondered how many women hadn't been that lucky. How many were still out there somewhere, waiting for someone to notice they were missing, someone to care enough to look for them. 5 years have passed since that text from Jenna stopped me from getting into Corinne's car. I still think about it regularly, still check rideshare drivers obsessively, still send my location to trusted contacts whenever I'm going somewhere alone. The hypervigilance has faded slightly but never disappeared completely. I work now with an organization that trains rideshare drivers to recognize signs of human trafficking and what to do if they suspect a passenger is in danger. I give talks at colleges about safety and awareness, about trusting your instincts when something feels wrong, about the importance of having someone watching your back. Jenna comes to most of my presentations, usually sitting in the back row, ready to answer questions about what it's like to be the person monitoring someone's location, to see them heading into danger and have seconds to make a decision that could save their life. Valerie and I text occasionally, sharing updates about our lives. Her daughter is 12 now, in middle school, doing well. Valerie finished her degree and works as a victim advocate, helping other trafficking survivors navigate the legal system and recovery process. She says what happened to her either destroys you or transforms you into someone who can help others survive the same thing. She chose transformation. The college student who was held with her chose privacy. Last I heard, she'd moved across the country and started over with a new name. I don't blame her. Everyone processes trauma differently. Some people need to face it directly. Others need distance and anonymity. Both paths are valid. Corinne, Trevor, and Beth are all still in prison. They'll be there for decades. Their appeals were denied. Sometimes I wonder if they think about the lives they destroyed. If they feel any remorse at all. Probably not. People like that rarely do. I still live in the same city. Still use ride-sharing apps because the alternative is being afraid to go anywhere alone, and I refuse to let fear control my life that completely. But I'm careful. Obsessively careful. And I make sure the people I care about are too. Last month, I stopped a young woman from getting into a car that didn't match her rideshare app. She looked annoyed at first when I approached her, this stranger interrupting her evening. Then I showed her my phone with the mismatch visible. Her face went white. The fake driver sped away the moment he realized he'd been noticed. She filed a police report. I gave a statement. The cycle continues. Predators evolve and adapt, finding new ways to exploit trust and technology. But awareness evolves too. More people paying attention. More people willing to intervene when something looks wrong. The woman I stopped sent me flowers a week later with a card that said simply, "Thank you for watching." That's all any of us can do. Watch for each other. Trust those instincts that say something's wrong. And send that text when it matters most. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.